Thanks for joining us in the trenches with Dave Lapham, brought to you by First Star Logistics. As always, we're emanating from the tremendous studios that they provide, and we have a tremendous guest. One of my favorites, and I know he's one of yours as well, Solomon Wilcots. Television, radio, former player. I mean, he's all football all the time. He was at the Combine all week long. I listened to him on Sirius NFL radio, and man, you know, he's got guests like Ryan Leaf, Charles Davis. He's got executives from teams. He's got former players. He's got current players. He's got everything you can possibly have. Front office people, personnel people. But you know, the very interesting part of our little meeting here, he talks about the Sanders, Dion and Shador, and the relationship that he had. They both played in Cincinnati. Solly was playing with the Bengals, and Dion was playing with the Reds. And he talks about what Dion did for him and how impressed he was with Shador and what he's done with his teammates when he was at Colorado. That's the kind of inside stuff that you get when you're there all week long, like Solomon was, and great of him to impart that to us. But he's got a take on just about everybody. You know, the draft is deep. There's a lot of players to get in not just the first round, but rounds 2 through 5, 2 through 6. There's going to be players. Solomon Wilcots takes us through a lot of them, and we talking football with Solomon Wilcots is always a very pleasurable experience. We know you could be doing so many things. The fact that you decided to join us in the trenches with Dave Lapham, brought to you by First Star Logistics, is very, very kind. And we're coming to you from our outstanding studios that they provide for us. Can't ask for anything more than we've got here. Can't ask for anything more than we've got as a guest, because this is my man. You guys love this guy. I love this guy. Solomon Wilcots. As a player, he was part of the turnaround at Colorado. Bill McCartney came to Colorado and turned that program around. I mean, national power for multiple seasons. Gets drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. Plays so well, he's a member of the 40th anniversary team, the Cincinnati Bengals. Also played with the Vikings and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now he's an award-winning analyst, broadcaster, podcaster. And boy, this week, as I was driving around, I had Sirius NFL radio on, and Charles Davis and Ryan Leaf, a couple of guests that Solomon had, but he had so many. I mean, you talk about executives, coaches, whatever. Anybody affiliated with the NFL wanted to be on Solly's radio program the whole week of the Combine. You must be tired, Solly. We really do appreciate you giving us time, man. You were great last week.
Hey, I appreciate it, Dave. Every time we go back to Indianapolis for the scouting combine, it just brings back so many memories of the time when we were transitioning and coming from college and into the NFL. We all had to kind of go that way. And I just remember Eric Thomas and I were roommates at the scouting combine. And I remember when we were done with our workouts, I wished him all the best. I didn't know a few months later we would be drafted on the same team. And he and I would end up being roommates for our first few years here in Cincinnati. It was sort of fortuitous, right? You know, we get there and just so happened they put us in the same room. We're roommates. We go through our workouts together. And then we get drafted to the same team the same year. It was quite phenomenal. So those are just some of the memories that sort of come back whenever I'm in Indy for the scouting combine. It's always a good time.
You know, Solly, it's really interesting. And I think back, we didn't have a combine, but I think back to the NFL draft. And, you know, they'd come to our college or university for not even a pro day. It was like a workout, private workouts or whatever. But at the All-Star games, they would, you know, meet with you and interview you and all that sort of thing, just kind of trying to get to know people. But I remember when I got drafted by the Bengals in the third round, my head coach at Syracuse was legendary Ben Schwartzwalder. He had 25 consecutive non-losing seasons. At that time, it was a college record. And he's in the Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame. And when I got drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, he was good friends with Paul Brown. And he said, hey, you got a chance. This guy, if he drafts you, he's got a plan for you. This isn't a haphazard thing. Paul Brown knows his football. And you know what? It's like you get drafted by the Bengals and Paul Brown. My assistant, my line coach, Bill Tiger Johnson, couldn't have asked for anything more. You have Dick LeBeau. Can't
Yeah.
ask for anything more. That's
Yeah.
such an important part of it, isn't it? I mean, getting drafted is one thing, but in the right situation, being developed by the right people, that's key, isn't it?
Yeah, I often sort of use the analogy of being, planted in the right garden, tended to by the right people, right? Coaches, right? And nurtured in the best soil. Uh, and so if you're a farmer, when I was a kid, we we had a garden. We lived in the city, but we had garden every summer, and we had to pick all the vegetables and whatnot. We had a fruit tree in the yard of every kind of fruit there was. But I remember just learning. I think it's good for kids to learn that kind of stuff because I remember my parents just teaching us about the soil and about how to nurture things and about how to work hard. And over time, if you do the right things, this is what you get when it's time to pick from the harvest, right? But you can't do that if you're not coached by the right person or if you're not. I often, Eric and I, we talk about this, man. Could you imagine if we would have been drafted by another team and had to play for a DB coach who didn't know what the hell he was doing, because there are a few of those, right? But Dick
Yeah.
LeBeau, we just felt so fortunate to have been coached by him. That when we got here, we kind of knew we were in a good situation. I remember talking to Paul Brown the very first day when I went out and had my first practice as a rookie. And the fact that he took the time to talk to me or any of us, I mean, you really cherish that. And so I kind of knew I landed in a good spot, right? I didn't worry about what other people were saying about the team. Agents were saying, "Wow, they're difficult to deal with financially. They're kind of on the cheaps." I heard all this stuff. I didn't
Yep.
care about any of that. All I wanted to do was play football, and I knew I had a good coach who now is an owner, and then I had a good offensive coach by the name of Sam Weiss who helped coach Joe
Yep.
Montana and helped start the West Coast offense, and I had a coach named Dick LeBeau who really was essentially a Hall of Fame player with 60 or more interceptions. I
Yeah.
knew I landed in a good environment and I was being tended to by the right people.
And that's such a key thing. I mean, it's not only getting drafted, but where you get drafted, who you get drafted by for the development part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a two-stage thing, drafted and then developed.
Yeah.
And man, we were both in fortunate places in that regard. Talk about what it was like. Bill McCartney he had like a. You talk about a guy that set a culture at
Yeah.
Colorado, right? I mean, it was all about culture, and that's what Al Golden's trying to do now with the Cincinnati Bengals defensive football team. Bring in a different culture and get guys acclimated to his way of doing things. There's some analogies there, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was in January, I was away. I was in Portugal on business, and then we kind of turned it into a little mini vacation before I had to come back and get to New Orleans for the Super Bowl. And while I was away, I got the letter from Coach Mac's son, Mike McCartney, that Coach Mac had passed away. And so I'm over in Portugal. I'm trying to call and get information on the ceremony. And by the time I got back, literally the day I got back, the next day I had to fly and try to make it to the service. And
Mm,
everyone was there. I mean, it was quite moving because he started something. As you well know, he started Promise Keepers, right? He
yep.
he was a guy that at the University of Colorado, he turned it into this mecca where I remember when I was in Pittsburgh playing, for instance, we had 8 guys from the University of Colorado. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And I remember Rod Woodson saying, "Man, we got all these Colorado Buffalo guys." He said all of you can play. I remember getting a compliment from him, but I remember my early days there, it wasn't that way. We had to really work hard to be able to beat a University of Nebraska, where Dr. Tom Osborne had already built a machine. Barry Switzer had
Yep.
already built a machine at Oklahoma, and that's what we were fighting against. And then we became the machine. We would, after I came here in '87, 3 years later in '90, they won a national championship. But a lot of the guys that I recruited from my hometown in Los Angeles. Guys like Eric Bieniemy, guys like Darian Hagan, Dion Figures, Chad Brown was from Pasadena. So a lot of guys from our area that I was trying to convince not to go to USC or UCLA, pass all that up. Boulder's the most beautiful place you've ever been. That's what we would tell them. And when they
Yeah.
got there, they saw it was true. And we were able to build something special. And when you have great coaches like that who have a vision and they're teaching you the right way to do things, it travels, it's consistent. And if you do those right things, you're going to win. And that's what you see in an Al Golden, right? When he left here after the 2021 season and became the defensive coordinator with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, you saw that team go upward. I mean, they shot up and they
Yep.
surprised a lot of people this year during the college football playoffs. But it was the discipline. Yes, they're talented, but it was the discipline in which they played with, the technique, the communication that really allowed them to beat teams that no one saw them beating Georgia. I mean, come on. Kirby Smart, I saw the look on his face. He was stunned at the end of that game. And so now Al Golden comes back to Cincinnati. He knows the culture. He knows what Zac Taylor wants in the defense. You got to look at an offense and defense working together to try to create a special team, try to win a championship. And Al Golden knows the kind of players that are needed in this defense. He took the same kind of defense to Notre Dame and now coming back with it. There's not a huge departure from the things that Lou Anarumo was doing, but just looking to improve upon those things and get better with similar personnel. So you don't need a real personnel shift. You just kind of need to continue to add on and continue to build to what's already there.
You're right, Solly. And he had 5 players. I think it was 5 at the combine, which was like 7th most, I think.
Yeah.
From Notre Dame, and most of them were defensive players. How about what do you think as a former safety yourself? What do you think of Xavier Watts? Where do you think he stacks up in the draft, the safety from Notre Dame? Have you had a chance to look at much of his tape?
Yeah. Oh, I love Xavier Watts. Now, there's some other good safeties. Jahdae Barron, who won the Thorpe Award at the University of Texas. Nick Imawari. He was a guy that stood 6'3", 220 pounds. I mean, he reminds you of a decathlete. He ran a
Yeah.
4.38 in the 40, had an 11 feet 6-inch broad jump, jumped 43 inches in terms of his vertical jump. This guy's going to go really high. I think any one of those 3 players would be great. I think Xavier Watts is probably a better fit because he knows the defense. He knows what Al Golden wants, and Al knows him. Al knows what Xavier Watts could do. This guy's a 2-time All-American, was phenomenal over the last couple of seasons, leading that Fighting Irish defense. I really like his temperament. He's going to be a smart player. Here's a guy that he's going to remind you. In fact, when I talked to him, Dave, I talked to him at the combine. I asked him, I said, give me a comp, give me a player that you would say your game is similar to, guys that you've watched in the NFL that you've kind of modeled your game after. And I'm telling you, without a blink, he said Jesse Bates. I was like, I said, get out of here. He said Jesse
Wow.
Bates. I was blown away. because I was
Wow.
already thinking it. I just
Yeah.
remember I watched him play. I watched Xavier Watts a lot this year.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I ended up watching him a lot because I love what he did his junior year, and then to come back what he did this past year. And I have a friend of mine, his son is on the team in South Bend, so I got to see a lot of their games. So I got to see him play a lot. I absolutely love him as a player. I think tremendous football IQ, like Jesse Bates. He finds the ball or the ball finds him. Either way, it's still a good thing, right? But he's very disciplined. You and I both know there's some defensive backs, they make plays, but they end up giving up a lot because they're chasing it. They're overly anxious to try to make a play, and they end up giving up 3 plays for every 2 they make. Not him.
Right.
He waits his time, he bides his time, and he's very disciplined in his approach. And then when the opportunity presents itself, bam, he pounces and he makes a play. He's very versatile. So he can play the nickel, he can play the dime, he can play box safety, he can play deep safety, he can play center field, he can come off the hash and your cover 2 or quarter scheme. So that's what you need. Need a guy who can play man-to-man coverage, right? Against some of the best tight ends in the league, and he can do that. But you also need a guy who can quarterback everyone, tell him how to get lined up. But when he's playing in the myriad of different zones that Al Golden's going to run, he can fit into any of those schemes, whether you ask him to play deep or to rotate down in the box. And by the way, he's an excellent tackler. So, with all that, that makes for a really, really good football player.
What about Benjamin Morrison, his teammate out on the outside at corner? What do you think about him, Solly?
Yeah, I like what Benjamin was able to do. I liked all of their corners because they were
Yeah.
all very productive. And Morrison's a guy that they play almost like 50% man, and then the zones they play are so different. They run quarters, they play cover 3, they play some cover 2. They run split coverages. You know what? Where they might have cover 4 to one side of the field, cover 2 to the other side of the field. And so we call it cover 6, but it's really a split coverage, which, by the way, confuses even the best quarterbacks.
Yeah.
But no, I thought he was good. I liked all of their corners. They just played so well together that I thought all of them were equally as good, equally productive. There was really no one stand out more than other. That's why it took me about half the season to kind of get an idea of who was who, because they all played so well together. They fit in the scheme together. But Xavier Watts for me was the real standout. I thought he was the guy to make it work.
So, Al Golden, I mean, as we know, Paul Brown was a football genius. And I'll never forget my rookie year in 1974, sitting in the classroom, and Paul gets up about, I don't know, 5 or 6 games into the season. We didn't get off to a great start. And he goes, "Men, here's what we're running for this week's offensive run game plan. Put 3 runs up there. Here's our pass game plan. Put like 5 plays up there with, route combinations." He goes, "This is what we're running, but we're running it out of all kinds of formations, motion, change of strength. We're gonna window dress the heck out of it, but we're gonna simplify, guys. You're gonna know what your blocking assignments are on these very few runs and these very few passes from a protection standpoint and routes, and we'll make it look different. But this is it." And I'll tell you what, we go on a winning streak, because we're so into exactly what we're supposed to do, how we were supposed to do it, the whole 9 yards. That kind of reminds me of taught me a big lesson, boy. And I watched Notre Dame, and it's like, man, they can do so many things from one alignment. They at the snap of the ball, they're giving you one thing. Post snap, it's totally different, and they haven't changed personnel. They haven't run different personnel out there on the football field, man. They're very, very versatile, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. And Notre Dame is a unique institution in that they still recruit a certain type of young man, the
Right.
kind who are
Right.
very serious about life, very serious about their academics, very serious about their approach to the game, their willingness to work. They want people, young men who are from good families with some good discipline, with a certain moral code. Nothing off the table, right? Nothing above board, but it's just they would
Sure.
just want people who really bought in because when it's time to have a lot of complex things happening, you need people who can digest it all, not be overwhelmed and get emotional in a moment of crises. Paul Brown, as you well know, was the same way. He
Yep.
required of us to be good students of the game. He was the guy that first we were talking about him at the scouting combine. His name came up. He was the first coach in NFL history to take football into the classroom, to use
Yep.
videotape to study your opponents, right? To have you start taking notes on your assignment. So it was like
Hmm.
classroom. It was he was professorial in how he taught the game, which meant
The
he
first
knew he
playbook,
had to
first written
if he
playbook. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And if he was going to draft you, he knew you had to be a good student. Like he
Yep.
like you know this. If you were not a good student, you were not going to do well with Paul Brown. You just weren't. He
Yep.
expected you to know your assignments because when it came to having multiple and diversified plays like what you described, we're running the same plays, but from a myriad of different looks with different personnel. That means there's a lot of shuffling, a lot of moving parts. But at the end of the day, your assignment is simple. But if you can't keep up with all of that, none of it works. And
Yep.
so it starts with the kind of people that's why I'm a huge fan of Zac Taylor. I believe I think he's a guy that's going to be a coach here for a long time. I believe he's going to continue to win. I There's no doubt in my mind he is the kind of coach that Paul Brown would approve of, right? But those are the kind of players like what we just described, the kind of players that Notre Dame is used to having, the kind of players that Paul Brown would want. Those are the kind, and talking with Zac, those are the kind of players that he looks for. Those are the kind of young men that he wants on his team. And that's why that didn't surprise me when he hired Al Golden as his defensive coordinator, because Al Golden gets it. You were able
Yeah.
to watch him play throughout the college season in 2024. So the ability to have a high football IQ on both sides of the ball, and you have that in a Joe Burrow. You have that in a Jamar Chase and a T. Higgins. I think you have it. You saw in his second year in a Chase Brown, right? That's when you usually see it kick in. It's all a little foggy for most of us in our rookie year. But in that second year, it should be like a light bulb that comes on and the fog all clears, and now you got it. You could see with many of the players. I think Amarius Mims is going to be that way for him in year number two. And hopefully it's that way with Jenkins, as well as with McKinley Jackson. So I
Right.
think that's what we're looking forward to. You have to be able to grow and develop. But look, we're not here to make it easy, right? We're not going to lower the bar. You keep the standard here with the myriad of things that you do, because you do have to play an opponent that's working on diagnosing what you're doing on offense and on defense. So it's going to be complex. It's going to be complicated, but it's going to be sophisticated. But we need people who are smart enough to make the complicated things very simple and still be able to execute.
Man, you're exactly right, Solly. And I remember, we get that big playbook for the entire season,
Yeah,
but Paul would install one play at a time. I mean, the first day we'd run,
yeah,
he'd run 14 and 15 dive.
yeah,
It's like this is what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it against all these defensive looks. Here's how we're
yeah,
handling all that. And he put
yeah,
in one pass play, one
yeah,
protection, one run. And we'd run it all day. Two practices. The run play in the morning, the pass play in the afternoon. And it's
yeah,
like, man, but rep over and over and over. Second day, a second run play, a second pass play. So you couldn't wait to get to week two because at least you had double digits in terms of plays you could run out there, running past. But I mean, that was his principle of teaching. And man, if you couldn't keep up with it, I'll never forget this. My second year, 1975 training camp, we had a guy who was struggling. An offensive lineman was struggling mentally. Paul Brown comes up to him. He would give us tests. We'd have the written test. He'd grade us on the
yeah,
test, like you say, just like classroom.
yeah,
And so he gave the test back to everybody, and he kind of sneaks up behind this offensive lineman during the course of the meeting, and it was like a very poor grade. He failed big time, and Paul goes, we can't have one person that makes me dumb it down to his level, and it
Mm.
really is not fair to everybody else. And you're that one person. I have
Wow.
to dumb it down. I can't have you at the end of this meeting. Please give me your playbook. He just got it right there. It was like, woo, baby, unbelievable,
Wow.
man. Yeah, yeah. It was like, wow. So yeah,
Yeah.
the mental part of the game
Mhm.
was very vitally important to Paul Brown,
Yep.
as much as the physical part of it for sure.
Yeah.
Solly, all week long, you had all these great guests and interviews and all this sort of thing. What struck you most? I mean, what sticks out in your mind from the 2025 Combine? Is there a story or two? Is there a player or two? Is there an event or two that kind of like sticks in your head?
Yeah, it was interesting because as fate would have it, I got to have Shadur Sanders on the show. And as you know, I went to the University of Colorado and of course I know and have worked with his dad. I remember covering Dion when he was playing with the Reds. And I was working at WOWT. I was working at Channel 5.
Yep,
I'd go over to training.
yep.
I go down to spring training in Florida. And I get this one-on-one interview. He was so great with his time. And so as Shadur came on, and just listening to him, and I had kind of watched him over the last couple of years since he's playing for my alma mater. And I said, what I really do appreciate about you is your leadership, the way that you get your guys together. He really does do a good job of bringing team together. He doesn't leave anyone behind. This past year, the university had the highest average GPA for the football team in the over 100 years of playing college football at the University of
Wow,
Colorado. They had
wow,
they had over a 3.0 grade point average. The average was over 3.0 as a football
wow.
team. Now that's impressive. And I just remember talking to him about his leadership. And then I don't know. He must have intuitively thought maybe I had read something. He says, well, a lot of people don't know. He said that even going back to my time at Jackson State, he said, and I've been really fortunate that everybody knows who my dad is. Everybody knows, that, I grew up and we're very fortunate. He said, so what I wanted to do, I would take my teammates, the guys on my offense, and I would fly everyone down. He said they hadn't even stayed. He said, this is at an HBCU. They hadn't stayed in these kind of hotels. He said, so we would rent out a hotel for a whole week in Miami. He said, and then later in Houston, Texas, or in another location. And I'd take my offensive linemen and all my receivers and the running backs, and we work out for a whole week together
Wow, wow.
before we ever go to training camp. He said, and it brought us together. It made us really tight knit. He said, and we did that every year. He said, I did that when I got here to the University of Colorado. He said, and not a lot of people know about that. He said, but those are the things that we do that I don't believe any other quarterback is doing. And he says, I talked to Tom Brady about this. He said, and Tom Brady has helped me to be a better player for my teammates in the final minutes of games, in the final 2 minutes of games. He said, I need them to be good for me for the first 48 minutes. And in the final 2 minutes, I'm going to be good for them. I was blown away. I was blown away. I was like, who is this? Like,
Yeah,
I'm thinking, who
man,
is this I'm talking to? Because
man.
you don't hear that from college kids. You don't. That's something you hear from NFL players. I've done a lot of interviews with NFL veteran players, right? And that's kind of how you hear them talk. You don't normally hear that kind of wisdom and that kind of attentive, just being attentive to his teammates. And then he finally said he wasn't going to work out. He says, look, we got a lot of players back on campus who I think deserve to be here, but they didn't get invites. And he said, including my brother. He was talking about his brother Shiloh, who didn't get an invite. So he said that he and Travis Hunter, for their teammates, they wanted to make sure that they worked out back on campus at their pro day knowing that all the cameras are going to show up. But he said it's going to be more for them because they didn't get invited to the combine. So we're going to invite the combine to come to see us in Boulder. I mean, that's the kind of mindset. And I was really impressed by just how deliberate he was. He reminded me of his dad because his dad did give me a one-on-one interview when my job was on the line at Channel 5. They told me, if you don't come back with a one-on-one with Deion Sanders, you may not have a job when you get back. So I'm covering
What?
Major League Baseball, and Deion's playing for the Reds. You know how it is. You've been down there. It's all so many people in the media. And there was
Right.
one guy came up to me and said, "Hey, what's your name?" And I told him, "I'm Solomon Wilcots." He says, "Hey, I work with Deion. He's going to give you a one-on-one." Dave, I hadn't met him. I didn't even know him at
Wow.
the time. He said, he's going to give you
Wow.
a one-on-one. He said, here's the hotel we're staying in. Here's the room. You need to be set up, ready to go at this time on this day. And it was me and Scott Simpson. You remember our guy, Scott.
Sure. Sure.
Go in, we get set up. We do the interview. And I'm telling you, I was like, it made my career, if you know what I'm saying. So all
Sure.
those years
Yeah.
later, Deion and I are working together at CBS. And I said, Deion, do you remember you gave me that interview and I was working in local TV? I said, do you know how much you made my career? And typical Deion, you know what he says? Of course I did.
Oh, man. You mentioned the name in there, Travis Hunter. I mean, this guy, what's he got, a 4.0? I mean, he's a brilliant student, a
Yeah.
very intelligent human being, as well as a gifted athlete. This guy's special, isn't he?
Hey, look, he played every snap on offense, every snap on defense. He had over 1,000
Mm,
snaps on both sides of the ball. And,
crazy.
and then to have that kind of workload to do that well academically in the classroom, I kind of knew that the academic piece would put him over the top for the Heisman. I think if you're giving out an award that is that prestigious, and you play on both sides of the ball at the level that he plays at, and you're 4.0, you're an academic All-American, like you want that guy to have that award, right? So no, he's as phenomenal of a young man that we've seen in quite some time. And you know what I like about him? He just loves playing football. And sometimes I think when we get to this level, it's lost on players and that's why I like what Miles Garrett is. He says, "Look, man, I came to win. I want to have fun playing the game, and you can't pay me enough money to sit around and lose." And I think NFL owners everywhere ought to pay attention to that kind of mindset. Those are the kind of players you want. I don't care how much money you give him. He's not going to be happy if he's losing.
Right.
And so I think every coach wants a player like that. We all do, right? They want to win no matter what, even above the money, above all the fame and they want to win. They want to compete and they want to win. That's Travis Hunter. Whoever gets him, I'm telling you right now, I guarantee you they're going to play him on both sides of the ball. Maybe not full time, but this is a guy that you're not going to be able to keep off the field. He
Yeah.
wants to play, and when he gets out there, he wants to compete.
Yeah. He's incredible. He really is. So, the draft, as a former lineman, and the Bengals need help in the interior of the offensive and defensive lines.
Mhm.
They've already waived players at those positions: Sheldon Rankins, Alex Kappa. So they've got position spots available, for veteran free agency and the college football draft. I think that this draft is pretty well stocked in the interior offensive and defensive line. I think rounds 2 through 6. I mean, there's maybe in the first round, maybe there's not first ballot Hall of Famer guys.
Mhm.
There's good football players, and I think it continues. I mean, I think the depth of the draft is pretty strong on a round by round basis, and I feel like the Bengals might be able to do some business to the offensive and defensive line. Do you agree with that? The strength at those spots, Solly, and where else do you think this draft is deep?
No, I think the offensive line, interior defensive line, you're going to have some really good football players. It's It's very deep at those positions. I think the running back class is a really good one.
Yep.
And I think the tight ends, there's a really good group of tight ends that if the Bengals, I know that they're wanting to add that's one special player. Tyler Warren, I think, is a special player, the kid from Penn State. But
Yeah.
you got about four or five really good tight ends that are gonna be really good football players in our league. None of them are Brock Bowers, right, from a year ago,
Right.
but they're very, very good, and you have multiples. Whereas last year you had Brock Bowers, and that was it, right? Now you don't have any Brock Bowers, but you got maybe next tier down, but then you have maybe 4 or 5 of those guys. So the areas where the Bengals need help, I think the players are there. I think safety, the players are there. Interior offensive line, the guards, right? They're there. Interior defensive tackles, the players are there. And I think they're going to want to add some depth at running back to go with Chase Brown to help protect him a little bit, right? And the depth is also there.
Yeah, it's like, we talk about, you mentioned baseball with Dion with the Reds. In baseball, catcher, shortstop, second base, center field, you want to be strong up the middle defensively,
Yeah.
Football, you want to be strong up the middle, offensively and defensively. And the Bengals can help themselves with the being stronger up the middle with the interior offensive line. And then defensively, like you mentioned, Solly, defensive tackle, safety are right in the middle of the football field. There are linebackers. The Bengals have got a couple of pretty good ones. I mean, I just think that this draft hits them well, and I think if they take care of business on a round by round basis, there's going to be multiple options for them to improve this football team just about every single round with the 6 picks they've got.
Yeah, they kind of have to do it through the draft, right? Yeah, I think they may add a guard or one of the interior offensive linemen in free agency or something because I think they're looking at both guard positions. But for the most part, they're now at that point where they're going to have to really, really do well in the draft. They're going to have to not only draft well, but those players are going to have to yield production in their rookie years. They're going to have to
Right.
be good right now because some of the other depth pieces that were there are no longer there. And those guys who have been here now are asked to be starters. And so, and there's question marks by some of their names. So in order to really field a good team, they're going to have to keep the players that are all asking for new contracts. And I'm confident, or at least hopeful, that it'll get done. But if you do that, that means you really are going to have to tighten the purse strings and fill the rest of your team through the draft. So those draft picks are going to have to work out. This year, the draft seems to set up perfectly in some of the areas of need for the Bengals.
Solly, I've abused you as I always do in terms of too much time.
That's
But
all right.
again, man, there's nobody I like talking football with more than you, man. And you're talking about a very, very brilliant football player, a brilliant broadcaster, communicator. That's Solomon Wilcots, man. He is all about football, and we appreciate you giving us some of your valuable time, Solly. I know you're a busy man, and I'll tell you what, man, you kicked tail and took names last week, brother. Hell of a job.
Appreciate it. Always great talking ball with you, Dave. I enjoy it. So we'll get back together soon. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
Hey, Dave Lapham here. While games are over for the season, there's no off season for the First Star Media Group or First Star Logistics. Join me in the trenches and Joe Goodberry of Bengals on the Brain here on the First Star Media Group YouTube channel. First Star Logistics gave away great prizes during the season, which will continue with exclusive content and special giveaways during the off season. So please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to help us continue to grow the channel.